Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Redesigning Normal podcast. This is your host, Andrew Southern, and today I'm joined by Gretchen Warner, who's the head of schools for the Madeira School in DC. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we were speaking just a minute ago. I am interested in hearing all about this school. Can you tell me a little bit about the school and about how you became head of schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Madeira School is an all-girl boarding and day school located just about 10 miles outside of Washington, D.C. It was founded in 1906, so over 100 years ago, by a visionary feminist educator named Lucy Madeira. And while my official title is the head of school, I really think of myself as building and shaping the future female leaders of the world. So that's what I do.
Wow. And how did you become the head of school?
Well, interestingly, so my background is actually as a scientist. I have both my undergraduate and my graduate degrees in chemistry, and I was a chemistry teacher for a long time. And the more that I taught, the more I fell in love with academic leadership and academic administration. And so I kept taking on more and more challenging roles. And Madeira has been in my periphery for a long time. I grew up on the East Coast, and I've been an all-girl educator for most of my career. And when I heard that Madeira was looking for their 10th head of school, I jumped at the opportunity. Such a rich history, such an interesting founding, prime location. We're on 376 acres on the Potomac River in this amazing area with incredible programs. So I jumped at it and landed here in July of 2020.
So you moved during the pandemic for this job?
I sure did. Yeah, I drove cross country. I was coming from Los Angeles, so packed up my car with my rescue dog and my husband, and we drove cross country during the pandemic to land at Madeira to start this incredible journey in leading a school in a pandemic amongst a whole lot of other things going on during the 2020-2021 school year.
Well, if we back up a little bit, and maybe you don't have a view into this, what was happening at the school in March of 2020? Somebody must have sort of filled you in on what went down.
Oh, yes. So when the pandemic struck, I mean, certainly, schools across the country had to pivot really quickly. I mean, most schools, and Madeira included, had to shutter the doors in March of 2020 without knowing when the students or teachers were coming back. And so Madeira pivoted to, online and remote learning in the spring of 2020. And then we watched and waited to see how this pandemic was going to evolve. I mean, I think back to March of last year and April of last year and thinking of, well, of course we'll be back for graduation.
Right.
Well, okay. Well, no, of course we'll be back, for summer school. Well, of course we'll be back in September. But as we learned more and more about the viral landscape, we really had to shift and pivot and think about how we were going to deliver on our educational philosophy and mission. And so as we approached the fall of 2020, I'll tell you what, there's never been a better time to be a chemist head of school and diving into data and tables and really looking at how can we safely open and operate in a pandemic.
Were those plans already being formulated when you got there over the summer?
Yes and no. Some base plans had been laid, but I think what everyone can really resonate with is that we have learned so much about the virus every month, every week. And so while plans were being made, until we learned more about what was happening from the CDC, from local and state government, and what restrictions we put in place, we were constantly iterating what the plan was going to be, making sure that safety and wellness being at the fore for the community.
Okay, so are you guys you're all in person now, or where are you at right now?
I am super proud that Madeira has been able to open for in-person and remote learning since the beginning of the school year, which is pretty remarkable. Our teachers are doing the holy grail of teaching. They are teaching students both in person and remote at the same time in the same classroom, and they have been throughout this year. And I think one of the things that's just been, so interesting and critical about this year is that, and parents and educators across the country know this, that the demand and the need for high quality teaching and learning is there. That has not changed. But when we think about how we're delivering on giving students high quality teaching and learning, everything that we've had to do has changed or shifted. From how are we building connections, relationships, how are we giving students agency and choice, how are we allowing them to, facilitate deep and meaningful learning and apply original thought. All of the tricks and tools that teachers have used, we had to iterate. And very quickly. And I think that's been one of the hallmarks of the challenges for this year.
I'm interested. I want to get into it for a second because I'm a technology consultant, and I have been interested when a teacher needs to do that hybrid where you've got students are in the classroom. I have my traditional way of teaching them. Right, it's a known thing how to do this well, but I also have like a mic, and I've got a camera in the back of the room. And I'm broadcasting the same lesson to some students that can't be there or prefer not to be there during this time. And then they're represented on a screen over here. Like, how does it actually work?
Yeah, so just like you described is how it works.
Okay.
Oddly enough, in some ways it feels like we're in a bit of a sci-fi movie because you've got people, on team or on Zooms, you've got students in the room, you've got a teacher that might be on Teams or Zooms or rotating from class to class. What really becomes critical is the way that teachers are designing the lesson and the way they're designing the outcomes that they want students to reach. One of the things that's just so important, particularly as we've thought about it in this year, is the equity of experience for our students. And how are we designing lessons and how are we designing experiences that are equitable across platforms, whether you're in person or remote? And that comes down to lesson design. Teaching is no more what you and I probably experienced when we were in school. It's not a sage on the stage who's just imparting knowledge and wisdom. It's allowing students to construct their own knowledge and meaning, and doing so in ways that's using technology to really amplify that learning.
Okay, this is great because this is a new chapter in the podcast, because a lot of what we've been speaking about so far on this series is about redesigning spaces. But what you're talking about is redesigning process. Yeah. Right? So how do you do that? Okay, so we're doing a typical lesson on I don't know, a history lesson, right? Yeah. And how do you engage the sort of FAR participants? You guys have probably developed some cool tricks to get their sort of buy-in to that experience?
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting, and I think one of the things that's just so critical about our community is that our students want to be learning. And I believe that of all children, that they want to be learning. But I feel really lucky that our students want to be here, want to be in community, and want to be learning. But I think one of the things that's been really interesting is how teachers are adjusting their expectations for outcomes, so that rather than thinking about students just solving problems, it's about designing the solutions. The way that I think about it, let me put this in a different way. I think about, the question that we used to ask students is, what do you want to be when you grow up? But now the question is, what problems do you want to solve when you grow up? And reframing and engaging students from that place of how do they want to, what problems need to be solved and what solutions do they find? And I think a really good example of this is, so one of the hallmarks of Madeira is we have 5-week internships for every student in grades 10, 11, and 12. So every single student, it's called our co-curriculum program. It's been here for over 50 years. And all of our students engage in a 5-week internship once a year. So you want to talk about how we're engaging students and how we're really drawing them in, whether they're remote or in person. For so long, we've been reliant on our partners for our co-curriculum program to provide these internships for our students. But as we've faced the pandemic, we've really been thinking about not only that partnership, but how are we giving our students the skills and competencies to be remote learners and workers, much like we've all shifted to remote work. And so how we've redesigned those internships, again, thinking about student engagement at the fore, that's been really, really interesting because that's a critical piece of our educational platform.
Wow, it's just amazing. So how are the students doing?
The students are doing really well. Madeira is thriving. Our students are engaged, they're excited and happy to be here, they're learning at high levels, they're engaging in critical discourse with one another. Madeira's mission, I forgot to say earlier, but Madeira's mission is to launch women who change the world and to lead innovation in girls' education. And this year has allowed us to really reach for those and achieve that mission and vision in ways that, again, pre-pandemic, while we were doing it, this has really, shaken the snow globe and given us an opportunity to really iterate and think about how our girls, to your point earlier, can be engaged in rich and meaningful ways, really while looking to the future.
I love the snow globe metaphor. I actually
great?
spoke to yeah, I really like it. I spoke to another educator who said a very similar thing. He actually said, we have a great school, we've been doing great stuff for a long, long time, and we were due a shakeup.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because we needed to adopt some of these technologies, and it's very difficult to just, one year over the next, like just say, we're gonna have this new remote learning module or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It takes something as disruptive as a pandemic to just be like, we have to implement a remote learning module, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
his expectation is that they would keep that potentially, for a couple of years or maybe even longer, or that technology would be usable for some other reason or some other way, right?
Yeah.
What do you see as, do you think that there are some things that you've learned during this that you will continue to utilize? Let's say this is over, I hope, in 6 months. It's like it's a long, we've forgotten all about it, right? Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
What do you think remains?
Yeah, so that's one of the most critical questions that I'm thinking about is what's next and what can we capitalize on in this moment of educational disruption? And specifically, what can we do at Madeira to amplify our mission and our vision? And the thing that I look to, I am a research-driven educator. And so I look to best practices in education, I look to best practices in girls' education, and translating the research that's coming from higher ed as well as the business sector to think about how are we amplifying Madeira's mission and vision. And one of the most recent reports I read came out from McKinsey not too long ago, and it talked about the future of work. And it was talking about the skills and competencies that employers are looking for in workers and how the notion of what degree you earned is not as important as what skills and competencies you have so that employers can retrain you. It's thinking about the co-collaboration and the co-creation skills that people need in order to collaborate across many platforms, many time zones. And taking that research from McKinsey and thinking about at a high school level at Madeira, how are we going to internalize some of these skills, competencies, and things that we know our students need in order to thrive in an environment post-college, post-graduate school, and how can we begin to lay the groundwork here and now? And that, to me, is the most exciting part of being an educator right now, and thinking about how Madeira is going to launch these girls into a future with these new skills that you and I and so many of our colleagues are learning on the fly as we're going through this. But how can we really prepare our students for it?
Right. So that's a benefit right there, right? This familiarity
huge.
with some of these things. I was also just thinking while you were talking, like if I was I wouldn't be because I'm a male, but I imagine a sophomore, like a 10th grader, right, at your school, going through this for a year, right? Yeah. And then having hopefully a more typical 11th grade and 12th grade experience. The resiliency that's like built into that experience.
It's huge.
It's huge, right?
Yeah,
It's a life experience that everyone, including your parents or your caretakers and your peers and your little sister, everyone went through.
Yeah, it's a common experience. It's building that resiliency. It's also just learning to manage, to self-soothe, to really amplify the skills that you want to work on. It gives you the opportunity to try new things that maybe you haven't done before. But I think your piece about the resiliency is just so critical. I think the other thing that really, as I think about a 10th grader, is what an opportunity. We're doing this at an institutional level at Madeira, but we're also doing this with students at an individual level, is what are the habits, routines that you're going to keep, cut, or curate? You know, I think about how critical that is to think about, again, not only at the institutional level and this educational disruption, but a really personal level for an adolescent girl. You know, what are the things that she can keep, cut, or curate in order to help herself become a better learner, to be a better citizen, to be a better community member, and the opportunity to try different things on. The thing that I think is really fascinating about this pandemic is that, you know, strategic thinking now means 6 weeks. You know, that's it. Strategic thinking is 6 weeks out. You know, it used to be 6 years, or so the opportunity for our students is to try on and try different tactics. One of the other things that I think has really buoyed Madeira's resiliency and Madeira's thriving in this pandemic is that we have a really unique schedule. And this harks back to something you mentioned earlier, how you've been talking with people about spaces that have had to be redesigned for this new normal. And I've been talking about processes, but one of the things that we think about is time and how we're redesigning that. We have an innovative schedule. It's called the modular or mod schedule, where our school year is not broken up into semester 1 and semester 2. It's broken into 7 5-week modules. So we've been able to pivot in this strategic thinking. Every 5 weeks, we've had the opportunity to change how we're doing, to try a different practice, to give our students a different experience, whether that's virtual or in person. And that has been a game changer for Madeira.
And so does that mean that in between the modules, is there a little bit of a break that you can like re-implement things?
Well, that is a good question, because no, there is no break in between the modules. So that is a classic example of flying the plane while you're building it. And we've been doing that pretty well. You know, there have been some natural breaks in there, you know, whether it's some holidays or a winter break. But we do go back to back with our modules. So that our students, and their classes change from module to module. Our students don't have, 7 or 8 classes in a mod. They have 3 or 4 classes in a module. So it really gives them the opportunity to engage deeply in the learning.
You know, another thing that's come up and I've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of different industries, is how they're communicating with their people, whether it's their employees, or whether it's, in your case, the students and the families, right? Yeah. Like, if you are too sort of wishy-washy, people kind of lose faith in your ability to like make these decisions, right? Yeah. But if you're too strict with we're definitely going back September 1st or whatever, you could be wrong, right? Because there's just factors outside it. So how has communication changed between the school and the families?
Yeah, communication has always been important, but I think in 2020 and 2021, it has become even more so. And one of the things that we've found at Madeira is that the clear and consistent, transparent communication about our decision-making processes, with an appropriate amount of flexibility to make changes to decisions that we've made. So we've had a weekly email that goes out to families with any changes or updates. We've been communicative with deadlines and things of that nature, while acknowledging that these things may shift as we learn more about COVID. We have a COVID website about how we've chosen to reopen the school in this time of the pandemic. Madeira has really shifted a lot of the ways that we're not only communicating about some of the logistics, but one of the things that's just so critical in schools, and as we know for humanity, is the connectedness in a community. You know, it takes a village to raise a child, and one of the ways that we've really tried to amplify the connectedness with our community is by offering webinars and connection events and parent association meetings, and really as many opportunities as we can to have our community come together, whether it's virtually or in person, to keep that connection. Because just communicating via email, while nice and important, really it's building the connection between the humans in the organization that I think has really set Madeira apart and has really allowed Madeira to thrive this year.
It sounds like you have a very strong culture, right? And that's one of the things that if you're not in person, you really have to work to maintain that until such time comes that you can be all together,
Yeah.
right? So that's really interesting because email is really easy, really fast, right? It's really cheap. It's a great way to communicate in sort of one direction, maybe one and then one response.
Yeah.
But a real back and forth it requires like a different platforms, right? And I think the sort of like top level, of course, is like in person, right? Where we
It's
have
so
a
true.
presentation and everybody's there.
It's so
Unfortunately,
true.
we can't do that.
Yeah, I know. One of the moments that I think was most illuminating for me was actually in the beginning of the year because, I'm not sure if you've heard, but certainly there's been a concern about teenagers and technology and the amount of time they're on their phones for a couple of years now. And one of the things that I saw when we came back for in-person learning was how our Madeira students put away their phones and really relished being in person with the person sitting across the table from them, being in class. I actually saw a decrease in the way that our students were using technology and using their phones just in normal times because the opportunity to be in person was so resonant for them and so important that the whole Madeira community really, I think, has embraced the luxury, if you will, of being in person. And to your point earlier, I think that has strengthened our culture, that we see such value in being together and being in community. That's been one of the many silver linings to an otherwise, tough situation.
It is tough. It's definitely fair to like recognize that this has been very difficult for everybody, right? Whether you're a student, whether you're a parent or administrator. I want to ask you a little bit about the actual physical space of the school. Like, what did you have to implement maybe in the facilities in order to help the students feel comfortable? Maybe the families were asking you like, what are you doing to make sure that the kids don't sort of get each other sick with COVID or get them sick?
Absolutely, and our faculty and staff as well. Ultimately the providers of this incredible educational experience.
Yep.
I'm really proud of the way Madeira used research and data to inform the practices. I also think that Madeira did an incredible job of collaborating with other area schools to make sure that we are benchmarking among each other. But we've relied on the data, in terms of what our physical space looks like. When our students came back in the fall, there was directional signage in terms of doors and where to stand, as you've seen across many different industries. All of our students wear masks. All of our faculty and staff wear masks at all times, unless we're eating in the dining hall. But that was reconfigured so that our dining hall is COVID friendly and keeps 6 feet of physical distancing. I think what's so critical as we approached how we were going to redesign the spaces at Madeira was really pivoting and transitioning away from calling it social distancing and calling it physical distancing. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, physically distant but socially connected. Just because our students are staying 6 feet apart does not mean they are not socially connected. Certainly in terms of classrooms, we de-densified our classrooms. We made sure that if we had a class size that wouldn't fit in a single room with 6 feet of physical distancing, we split that class between 2 rooms, and our teacher would then pivot between the 2. So nearly every area, and certainly as a boarding school, that was an additional level of complexity because we have a congregate living situation where our students are living in community with one another. And designing, dorm rooms where students would feel comfortable and safe in order to take their masks off. So there were some physical dividers. So you name it, and we put into place whatever our local and state governments recommended in terms of COVID-friendly guidelines.
So if I came to the campus, I would have to fill out a health questionnaire? Or, what's the process?
If you were to come to campus, certainly we also do daily symptom screening and temperature checks. First, it would probably be pretty tough for you to come to campus right now because we're restricted to our current students, family, and faculty. There's a few guests who are allowed on campus, but we've really tried to keep our community safe. I think the other piece that has just been so critical, and back to your culture, what we were talking about before, is really relying on our core values, awareness of self and others, as well as some other principles, to think about how can we develop a pledge. And we did develop a pledge to keep Madeira safe and healthy. You know, that regardless of whether or not a student is a boarding student or a day student, that it's not trips to the mall, it's not going into Starbucks, it's not going into the grocery store, or being, cavalier with how we're spending our time outside, knowing that in order for us to continue learning in person, every member of the Madeira community has to agree that we're in this together, and we all have to practice the same principles together.
Got it. Let's look forward.
Yeah.
Is there a criteria where you're able to say, okay, like no more masks needed? You know, can you see that? Is that when kids are able to be vaccinated? Like, when is that?
Yeah, I'm going to rely on the CDC and local and state governments for a lot of that. I do think we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. I would say at this point, about 80% of our faculty and staff is vaccinated, which is huge. And that has made a difference. And certainly as we're seeing more from governmental agencies that students age 16 and above will very likely be able to be vaccinated. And then we'll see in terms of our younger students. I do see a very small light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm both an optimist and a realist, and our number one priority is to keep students safe. And while we can't guarantee their safety, we have to keep the protocols in place so that we can learn in person for as long as possible.
Right.
I don't see the day in the near future where we're not wearing masks. But certainly we're starting to hear some guidance change in terms of the physical distancing, whether it's 6 feet or 3 feet.
Right, I read that, yeah.
Yeah, but there's also some very specific guidance about schools for that. And so we're paying close attention to that. And certainly as we learn more about variants coming out of various different places throughout the world, we don't know yet how that's going to inform how we actually practice our community pledge. So,
of course.
I think the thing that I'm really focused on as we think about the future, which is what I get really excited about, is, how we are using this as an opportunity to innovate. For such a long time, people have been talking about 21st century learning skills. We are a quarter of the way into the 21st century. We now have to think about the 22nd century.
Right.
And how are we using this moment? And this is what I get really excited about, is how we're using this moment to really drive high quality, relationship driven teaching. That's never going to go away. And I think Madeira is in this really unique opportunity between our geographic location, the population of our students, all of the programs and possibilities. Classes at Madeira might not ever look the same, but one of the things that I also look to is our founder. And I think about Lucy Madeira, who in 1906 was innovative, and she designed some programs that were just revolutionary. I mean, there were student government and elected student leaders at Madeira before women had the right to vote in the United States. She emphasized STEM education for girls before that was a thing. She taught financial literacy and financial security for girls before that was a thing. We've been doing internships for 50 years. So it's how do we take those ideas from our founder and how do we put them into the 22nd century? And that's where I get really excited thinking about what are these COVID silver linings and thinking about how are we going to use the research to make sure our students are set up for success. That's the good stuff. What
have you been brainstorming on how, I would probably throw everything on the page and just try and pick out the best ideas or try them all.
Yes. Well, and I think that's what's so exciting about it is that because of this, we've shaken out of our comfort zone. And you're exactly right. Both my physical whiteboard and my digital whiteboard space are full of ideas for what does it mean to be a future thinking girls' school. What does it mean to really to be a school that focuses on relationship-driven collaboration and students constructing meaning and agency and choice? I don't want to give away all my secrets because I'm putting them in place right now.
Awesome.
But we're going into a strategic planning process right now where we're really thinking about these critical questions about the future of learning at Madeira and the future of how our mission will be amplified in generations of Madeira students to come. It's exciting.
It is. I think there's also like this like other silver lining, which is that your students are seeing those in a position of authority, right? The administrators and faculty and staff and even their parents are seeing them like dealing with this like, this like bill of materials that they've never had to deal with before. Like I know my kids are watching my wife and I like sort through how to deal with a problem we've never dealt with before.
Yeah.
And that is, so they're seeing your process even now, right? Like sort of iterating on where the school should go.
Yeah.
And I hope that all of your ideas work. Probably some of them, won't work as well, right? And that's okay.
But
And
that's
to see that process,
too.
right?
Yeah, that's
really
iterative
exciting.
process involves failure and it involves mistakes. And I think how critical it is that young women see leaders taking risks, learning from mistakes. I think that's critical. I think there has been a culture of a fear of failure and a fear of mistake making. And we know that the evolutionary biology of our brain is that we learn by learning from mistakes and reflecting and iterating. I mean, that's how as a species we got to be where we are today. And so when you really think about the evolutionary biology nature of our curiosity and how we learn from it, that is just so critical. And how do we amplify that in our girls and young women today is what gets me up every morning.
I was just thinking, like, I went to a great school. I don't recall ever being exposed to mistakes that those in authority had made. Like, it wasn't really spoken about, right? And if it was, if there was a misstep or a mistake, it was like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like we like this thing happened and it was bad. Like we shouldn't have done this. Whereas there's another way to look at mistakes, which is like, hey, this mistake happened. Here's how it happened. Here's what we learned. This is a good thing, right? Because it's not going to happen again. I just think that's like a whole other level of educating, like the margins, beyond the subject matter. And obviously, at a boarding school, there's a whole other level of stuff that you're learning as well, right? How to live with people, how to live on your own. I mean, it's a well-rounded education.
It is. One of my excuse me. One of my philosophies is that a community where the adults are learning is a community where the students are learning.
Right.
And I think that from the very top, from me and throughout everyone in the administration, the faculty, the staff has to model that learning process. And learning is messy. Learning does not happen automatically. It takes practice, it takes work, it takes effort. And I think how critical it is from my role as a head of school, and particularly as I think about our Madeira students, is to model and to role model what mentorship looks like, and more than that, what championship looks like. How do we champion our Madeira students and show them what authentic, courageous leadership looks like?
Wow. I love it. Last question I'll ask you. How have you seen increased interest in the program during this? Did some people fall off because maybe they needed to stay home? I don't know what the sort of like marketplace looks like for private education.
Yeah, because we were able to open in person, Madeira is on the rise. Madeira has been a stable force in the independent school marketplace for quite some time. But I think you'll hear this from a lot of schools that were able to open for in-person learning and deliver high quality teaching and learning. We are a sought after educational institution for our students. Our applications are up. And we're seeing a lot of interest, in large part because of the incredible work that Madeira faculty and staff have done to really deliver on our mission. And I think that is just critical. Everything that I do is in service to our mission. You can't see it, but above my fireplace it says "Launching Women Who Change the World." I see that every day, and that is what drives everything we do. Madeira has been as successful as it has been this year and will continue to thrive because of the incredible work of our faculty and staff and what they're modeling and showing in the classroom.
Wow. It's an incredible story. I'm so glad that you shared it with us on this podcast too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think that oftentimes, education might not be seen in the same way as other sectors, and I'm thrilled to be able to share how we're iterating and redesigning normal in the educational world at Madeira.
Gretchen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.